Is kind of an interesting one. So it's all about dealing with conflict and division and challenges in the church and everything else. And so it's all about...
Sure, there's nothing that could go wrong with that.
I know. Here's the funny thing for me. The crazy thing for me is every time I'd ever taught this, it had never really been a problem. Right? So it's kind of like not quite theoretical.
You get a little more practical experience.
As I'm going back through this, I'm like, there was a lot of stuff now. It reminds me. And so part of it, when I put this module together years ago, I had some ugly seasons that I'd either been a witness to or whatever else. Like, so when I interned, really ugly, very public church split when I was an intern in the church we were in. So it was one of the larger churches in Spokane. It was a really just catastrophic split. I mean, to the point of it was on the local Spokane nightly news because the church was so big and it just...
You really want the church to typically be on the nightly.
Yeah, it's not, if it's like feeding the poor or something great, but this was, there's a split happening at the Fourth Memorial Church. And so that one was pretty difficult. And then when I was at Indian Trail Church, had some internal stuff when I first did a merge there and faced some of it there. But really at Redemption, there's just always been pretty easy. Even when we were part of the denomination trying to get out and there was all that stuff that happened there, internally we were all really healthy and unified. So there was no internal strife, right? It was 3,000 miles away, people that, didn't want us to, deport or whatever else. And so it was kind of that. But certainly in the recent things, I'm like, oh, yeah, this all kind of plays differently. So the other thing about this, though, when I first put this together, I built it off the back of a message that Mark Driscoll gave at Gospel Coalition conference. And it's still fun to use it. So I'm going to use it. And
that looked like?
Yeah, that's 15 years ago, Driscoll, roughly. This is pre-Mars Hill implosion by about maybe 4 years, somewhere in there. This is probably about 2 years before it imploded. Which all the more, I think there's something about watching this because it's pithy and witty and it's clever what he does, and so I wanted to still kind of use it. But it is also interesting to listen to it in light of what you know about, if you know anything about Mars Hill and what happened with it. It is interesting to kind of listen to, like, he wasn't always taking his own advice, or he wasn't always, it preached well, but maybe he wasn't always as helpful with things with it. Nonetheless, I still like using it. Last time I used this, somebody said, maybe you should use something different. Like, can you use kind of a, like, quote, a fallen pastor or whatever else? I'm like, well, he resigned before they removed him, and now he's just pastoring another church, and he's way more Mark Driscoll than ever. But I think there's still value sometimes to on things, like somebody like he shares. I go, we can do something with it. So for the first 20 minutes of tonight, it's just going to be watching this. And that's going to be kind of number 1 and number 2. It's just filling in those blanks, right? Because he's kind of going through 20 kinds of negatives. And that's the one I still wanted to use, where he's describing like the kinds of negative people you might deal with in the church, and kind of gives a little pithy definition of each one. But I'm going to start with the first thing in your notes there, the 3 kinds of people, just to fill it in. 1A would just be positives, 1B would be negatives, and 1C would be neutrals. And so in any given church context, you're going to have that. And weirdly enough, you're going to have a decent number of positives. You're usually going to have a pretty small number of negatives, if any. And then you're going to have kind of a broader group of neutrals. They're along for the ride. They don't sway necessarily one way more or another way more, but they are interesting when you start to get negatives in the equation. They start to try to sway neutrals. So they try to recruit. And they're not going to recruit from people that are really positive about the church or positive about the leadership or whatever else. But you get the neutrals that could kind of go either way on things, especially if it's relationship or proximity. And so sometimes thinking in terms of shepherding in the church, you have to think not just about the negatives and the impact that they may be making, but you have to think about the neutrals that can be affected by the negatives that may be starting to speak up. And I would say what we went through here in recent months, there was some of that. Like we were having to get injected because there was people that were kind of more neutrals, or they didn't know what to do. Well, which side do I listen to? Which side is telling the truth? And that destabilized a much bigger group than just the initial kind of handful of negative voices. And so you're always having to think about those things. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hit play on this. And like I said, it's about 20 minutes long. So he lists them as 1 through 20. So you can just follow along and fill in the blanks as we go. And Then after that, we'll keep doing other stuff. So I'll come hang out with you fellows.
All right.
Paul is a great friend and pastor and mentor to Timothy and to us all. And the three big ideas I want to give to you tonight is that in ministry you will face the opportunity to pastor three kinds of people. There are those that are positives, those that are negatives, and those who are neutrals. The positives are those who do gospel things in gospel ways for gospel reasons because they want the gospel to win. These are people who will confront sin and heresy, but they will do so with love and grace and mercy and compassion because love covers a multitude of sins. These are people who are blessings more than they are burdens. These are people that are positive influences that help set a life-giving culture in your church and or ministry. They are positives. And I want you right now, just as an act of worship to God, to think in your mind of a few of those people that are positives. They're encouragers, they're servants, they're helpers. They begin with trust and love and grace and mercy, and their default is the gospel, and they are a great joy. There are also negatives who do ungospel things in ungospel ways for ungospel reasons because they want to win. These people are critical, they are negative, they are difficult, they are obstinate. The Bible uses words like stiff-necked to describe them. These are people who perhaps want to lead but lack the character or quality of doctrine to qualify. These are people who are difficult. They are hard. These are the people that keep the pastor up late at night. These are the people that when he sees their email in his inbox, his stomach knots up. And he knows it's going to be bad. And then there are neutrals. The truth is, in most ministries, there are only a few negatives, but they tend to be very loud, very vocal, very committed, very dominant, and so they're very visible and very powerful. Even though their numbers are few, their voice is loud. Most people, however, are neutrals. They're what the Bible calls sheep. And they are easily confused. They can be timid. They're not sure who to trust. They can be fraught with concern that is unnecessary. They'll hear a rumor or hear of a fight or a disagreement, and they easily are confused. They become distrusting and fearful. And the reason I tell you this is because what's happening in Timothy's ministry is that he has some negatives. And Paul wants to be a positive. And his hope is to influence Timothy to not be a negative. As Peter would say, to not return evil for evil, reviling with reviling. It's to respond to the negatives in a way that is positive for the sake of the neutrals. I think that's what's happening largely in 2 Timothy. And he is dealing with a large number of negatives. He says in chapter 2, verse 17, among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander. So we know of two guys that are sort of the ringleaders of the trouble, but among them, so there's a crowd. There's other people that are negatives as well. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, in his autobiography, as I was reading this week, he said that negatives, if I might insert that word, are like bees. Their sting isn't much, but when they swarm, it's trouble. Some of you right now are dealing with a swarm of negatives. And I thought about it, and from the context of ministry, I want to share with you 20 different kinds of negatives. I know there are more. I know there are more. If you email me, I will send you their photos in case they show up at your church so that you can guard yourself. But these are 20 kinds of negatives, and I want this to be a real practical help to those of you in ministry. First, there are success jealousy negatives. You haven't done anything heretical or sinful. Your ministry is going well, theirs is going poor. You have a building, they're a broke, covetous church planter. Right? With real estate lust, like most church planters have. Right? Your ministry is going well, or you have something they don't have, and they're just jealous. They're just jealous. Number 2, there are false witness negatives. People who lie or they tell half-truths. I talked to a man today. He was a very godly man, wonderful man, and said that he's been through a very hard ordeal in his ministry, and his character has been publicly attacked with things that are just absolutely not true. But once they get reported, there's still a problem. There are false witness negatives. Jesus had false witnesses, you know that. Jesus also had success jealousy negatives. His crowds were too big, so they were going to take him down a notch, and they did so by bearing false witness against him. Additionally, there are, number 3, misinformed negatives. People who hear something that's not true and act as if it were. And someone recently said, very upset about this. I said, if it happened, I would be very upset too. But I'm not upset because it didn't happen. You were misinformed. And sometimes the neutrals start to get transitioned into negatives by getting misinformed. They're talking to the wrong people. They're reading the wrong blogs. They're consumed by the wrong books. They're embroiled in the wrong controversies. You can really change the culture of a church by just removing a few negatives and elevating a few positives. Most of the neutrals change. You don't need to get rid of everybody most of the time. I didn't even mean that to be funny. I just thought that was Number 4, there are personal dislike negatives. People who just don't like you because of your sense of humor, your age, your race, your dress, whatever it might be. They just don't like you. So was there anything wrong with my character or my doctrine? I just don't like you. Well, that's hard to change. That's me. I know one guy, his people didn't like him because he was young. There's not a lot he can do about that. Charles Haddon Spurgeon was criticized of that as a young man. You're young. That's, yeah. Number 5, take up offense for another person negative. Some people repeat junior high for 40 years. In junior high, it's, oh, you're their friend? You can't be my friend because I'm not their friend, and you can't be my friend and their friend. Personal offense, say why? Well, so-and-so got their feelings hurt, and since so-and-so got their feelings hurt, my feelings are hurt too. You have this in your ministry? Susie's not happy, so I'm not happy. What are you not happy about? I don't know. Susie's not happy. That's what I'm not happy about. And maybe Susie's in sin. I don't know.
Just throw that out.
I just know we're not happy. And now we are an alliance. There are also missiological negatives. And this goes one of 2 ways. There are those on the right who see all forms of contextualization as worldliness. They'll write about this on their blog, which I find curious. Just something to pray about on your way home. They're using worldly methods. Like all the porn goes through the same distribution system that you're using. Just something to think about. And there's also missiological negatives on the left who say you've not gone far enough. All right, so you'll get stuck between the kind of the liberals and the fundamentalists, or the neoliberals and the neo-fundamentalists, and some will say you've gone too far into culture, and others will say you still believe you need Jesus for salvation and penal substitutionary atonement. You get shot from both sides. Additionally, there are, number 7, single-issue voter negatives. You ever met a single-issue voter? You can tell because the first Sunday in the church, they ask your position on their issue. And usually it's not really gospel-centered. It's, are you a Republican or a Democrat? I always say, I vote for Jesus. I write him in every time. And someday he will return. And I will win the election. Or they will come up and say, do you homeschool your kids, private school your kids, public school your kids? And you know it's a trick question. You know it. If the wife has a doily on her head, you pretty much know what the answer is. And if their kids are chain smoking, you know what the other answer is. You never know. sometimes the single issue voters too, it's weird things like eschatology. Now, I'm not saying I don't have eschatology. I believe hell is hot, forever is a long time, and I'd rather not go. I have some theological convictions regarding the end. But these are the guys that always come up. They're like, are you pre, post, mid, trib, rapture? I'm like, my position is I want you to be raptured. That's my position. That's my position. And I want you to take all of those books with you. And the movies. And what happens with the single issue voters, it's Jesus plus something. Bible translation, political party, form of education of the children, eschatological position. It's something, They're Jesus plus something people. In Paul's day, they were the Judaizers, and he says in Galatians, they were Jesus plus circumcision. Single issue voters are hard because you can be fine on all the essential issues, and there might be some secondary or tertiary issue that for them is a deal breaker, and they'll be very negative about it. A couple others. Number 8, chain of command negatives. These are people who want to be at the top. They want access to the top. They expect to talk to the pastor, pastor's wife, have your home phone number, email. Right? They expect to have dinner at your house a lot. They expect you to be friends, wear matching sweatshirts, ride tandem bikes, show up with their kids' bar mitzvah, the whole thing. And they don't obey chain of command. They don't work through the office. They call your home. They don't honor the elders. They want you just to act like a little dictator of a fiefdom and just tell you what to do, and then you tell everyone else to do. And they're very difficult because they don't respect chain of command in the church. They just want to go to the top and influence the top and boss the top around and be friends with the top and just always have access to the center of power. And they can become very negative, particularly when they're displaced. I double dog dare you, change your cell phone number, and you'll find out who these people are. Hey, what happened to your number? I changed it. Why? You were calling. Another one, I think it's number 9, little world negatives. Let me tell you this. One of the things that I think is at the heart of the Gospel Coalition, it's not my job to say this, but I will. So, is that there are a difference between boundaries. There are, let's say, city boundaries, which might be your church, your denomination, your network. Then there's your state, which would be like your theological team, right? I'm Reformed, complementarian. There's certain borders around that. Inerrancy and complementary gender roles, things of that nature. And then there's your nation. For me, my nation would be evangelicalism. Okay? So I want to be on good terms with evangelicals. I don't want to declare war on evangelicals in the same way that, Illinois shouldn't declare war on Iowa. I mean, it'd be fun, but it wouldn't be profitable. And I think I would win because they're all wrestlers. But what happens is people who are little world, they get scared of anyone that's outside of their proverbial city. You didn't go to the same seminary as me, you're suspect. You don't buy all your books from one publisher? Look at your bookshelf sometime. If you have 3 or 4 publishers that constitute the totality of your library, you may have turned your theology into a prison and not a home. A place that you're not allowed to leave to go visit other brothers and sisters. Some will only fellowship with those who are Reformed, and if you go beyond the city to affiliate with other Reformed folk, they get very upset. Or if you go beyond that, and let's say you're friends with an Arminian. It doesn't matter that God predestined you before the foundations of the world to be friends with the Arminian. That's going to be a negative. Additionally, number 10, there are tradition negatives. Tradition negatives are just opposed to change. Any change at all. Any change at all. Slight change in the order of service, service times, even things that you think would be very minimal, it becomes a negative. And sometimes you don't even know that certain people are tradition negatives until you change something, and then you find out who they are. As well, number 11, there are unforgiving negatives. These are people that even when you apologize or repent, they don't forgive, and they keep old rocks to throw. Right? Love keeps no record of wrongs. And these people are archaeologists. Additionally, there are, number 12, plank spec negatives. These are religious folks. They are keenly aware of everyone else's sin and not so aware of their own. They are people who preach repentance but don't practice it. This is classic religious problem. And too many pulpits call sinners to repent of sin, don't call religious people to repent of religion. And in so doing, they fuel plank spekedness, whereby it's always about someone else's sin. And you end up with a bunch of people like the guy who went into the temple and prayed, "Thank you, God, I'm not like these other people." Those people are very negative, and they're very negative toward lost people. Toward lost people. And a woman talked to me recently who was a woman who was very sexually promiscuous before she met Christ, and she heard from a pastor say the difference between a woman who sleeps around and a prostitute is at least the prostitute is smart enough to get paid. And this was a woman who slept around a lot before she met Jesus. She walked out feeling, I'm worse than a whore. That's plank spec. What he did, I think, was at least as bad as her sleeping around in high school. Because he knew the gospel and didn't offer it to her. And I think that's damnable. He didn't give her any hope of expiation and cleansing through Christ. You're just worse than a whore. Goodbye. That plank speckedness is a dangerous thing, and it repels lost people. There is also, number 13, diatriphes negatives. 3 John 9 says he always wanted to be what? First. He wants to be up front, or she wants to be up front. They want to be known. They want to be listed on the literature. They want to be first. They want to be honored. They want to be recognized. And if you don't do that, they will become negative. Additionally, there are, number 14, distrust negatives. These are people, they start. Their default is distrust. You're guilty till proven innocent. Which means you have to work very hard to earn their trust, and once you get it, you have to work very hard to keep it. If one of these people is on your staff, they will exhaust you. Amen? Okay, if you're here with them, you can say amen. Fire them. And these are people that it just distrust is so hard. And what that means is they become negative very quickly because they're always assuming the worst. Additionally, there are control negatives. Number 15, control negatives don't understand the difference between power and influence. They think control, let me say that differently. They don't understand the difference between control and influence, and they don't understand that influence is more powerful than control. Influence is up close. Control is from a distance. Influence is through loving relationship. Control is through fears and rules and control mechanisms. Control negatives, they want to intimidate people. They want to rule through fear of man. They also want to impose through law. They want to punish and threaten. And if they're allowed to set the culture in a church, it becomes toxic because it's not one of influence. It's not one of influence. There are people that influence you that are far more powerful than people who try to control you. Because they love Christ and they love you, they influence you for Christ. Control negatives don't understand that. Number 16, there are critic negatives. Critic negatives are those who they're critical. They're always nitpicking at something. They're always looking for something. They're the people, it doesn't matter how good it went, they come up and point out the one thing that didn't go well. How many of you, after your sermon, you feel like, hey, I preached the word and we worshiped Jesus and people got saved and I was really encouraged and I saw that guy in line and I thought to myself, oh man, I'm sure I did something. I don't know what it is. I know he's going to tell me. And if not, I'll read it on his blog. Just always looking for something. They don't seek evidences of God's grace in someone's life. They seek evidences of someone's depravity. There are, number 17, warrior negatives. They are looking for a hill to die on. They read stories of martyrs, and they're determined to be one. These guys are sick. If they are white, under 25, without a wife, they are the worst. If they are Calvinists at Bible college, they are worse than the worst. I have these guys in my church. I had a guy come up recently, 20-year-old white guy. It's always a 20-year-old white guy. He said, I want to talk to you about paedo communion. Really? I want to talk to you about Wookiees. Since we're talking about things that don't matter. I looked, I said, do you have a wife? No. Do you have a child? No. Do you have a girlfriend? No. Want to know why?
You have no hope of even any of this.
Paedo communion. You want to argue about things for children, and girls won't even talk to you. You're so far away from having to really worry about this issue. Your whole theology is a form of birth control. You never have Number 18, there are one-handed negatives. Right, we're supposed to have two hands. In one hand, we have things we're going to fight for and die for, like inerrancy and penal substitutionary atonement and literal conscious eternal torments and hell, stuff like that. Open hand, secondary issues. Doesn't mean in our church we don't have convictions, but we're not going to declare war over certain secondary issues. I'll give you an example in Acts 29. At Marcel, we are Credo Baptist, just like the Bible. But in Acts 29, we have guys who are Paedo Baptist. And we would never kick them out. We would never disfellowship them. Why? Because what we hold dear around the gospel is more than enough to hold us together. There are little differences on eschatology, spiritual gifts, worship styles, and the like. And we say, you know what? What's in the closed hand is more than enough to make us family. What's in the open hand, we can discuss and dialogue and debate and kick around as brothers. We're not going to declare war over that. Now, single-handed negatives, they're either fundamentalists who fight over everything. I had a guy tell me not long ago, he said, I would die for the King James Bible. My question was, who's going to kill you? It's like, I'm going to die for soft serve ice cream. I don't think it's going to happen. You know, I don't think it's risen to that level of. And one-handed people, but then there's liberal one-handed as well. See, fundamentalists of everything that close hand, they fight over everything. And pretty soon, if they're little world negatives plus one-handed negatives, they run out of things to argue over. So they start fighting over things that they don't even know what they're fighting over. Just always fight over something now, but then there's liberals, they won't fight for anything. You're like, Jesus, Buddha, yeah, they're both nice guys. I mean, it's like, come on, seriously. Lean over the plate, take one for the team, please. Fight over something. Hey, this is a Bible. You know, anything. Pick something. And single-handed negatives, they only have an open hand or they only have a closed hand. And they become very negative. Additionally, there are number 19, gossip negatives. These are people who talk about people, not to them. Okay, sometimes it's prayer. Watch out for intercessors. That's the Greek word for gossip. Pray for Sally. She's an alcoholic. Really? Yeah. It's really bad. Have you talked to her? No. I'm just interceding for her, and I'm asking others to do the same. Gossip. You're a gossip. I don't care if you say amen and beseech and thou sayest. It's still gossip. These are people who talk about, not to, number 20, there are theological negatives. These are people you just don't agree with. And you're not going to. You're just not going, this has happened more than once. I had a woman come to the race and she said, I feel called to be a pastor and I feel like I should be on the preaching team. She said, what do I need to do to make that happen? I was like, kill me. You know, and every other guy, it's just, I love you and you're my sister, but we're never going to agree on this. We're never going to agree. So you know what? I love you. We could study it. I'd like to try and change your mind. And if not, this probably isn't going to be a great place for you. You're always going to feel like you're not able to do what you're supposed to do. There are theological negatives as well, and they can turn it into a big issue. Now, I say all of this to say that here is what, back to the text, Timothy is dealing with.
Negatives. All right. So, any insight, any thoughts, any, oh yeah, I've seen that before.
So much focus on the negatives. I think that's just life. I mean, not, kind of blow past the positive, but I don't know.
Well, luckily, we'll get into point 4, and we'll have 20 ways to be a positive.
Oh, there we go.
Look at us. We're gonna pull out of the nosedive. It's pretty nice. Yeah. So you'll have for sure 40 points tonight. 20 on the negative, 20 on the positive, some other stuff in between. So, but so anybody, anything?
I think it's a good thing to label that type of stuff. It helps you. It's stuff you can kind of slip into, maybe if you're not really paying attention.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things I've noticed when I've seen it up close, whether it was some of the stuff that we've recently gone through, or when I went through the stuff watching our split happen when I was an intern, part of what happens in all of it too is most of the time the person that's in that space of negative thinks they're doing the right thing. That's also what makes it really challenging. Like they think it's a righteous cause. They think they're engaged in a right thing. In fact, it was even interesting. We were talking with Austin about this whole youth group merge thing. And we were just kind of talking about, he said, what are the non-negotiables as far as like theology and, what are doctrinal borders that we want to make sure we're protecting and that kind of thing. And I was just really open with him. I said, here's the thing. There's actual things where we could disagree. Those are things to talk about. I said, but oftentimes I find it's usually, it's like on paper, you may be right, but the way you're doing it is so wrong. You're divisive even in your rightness, right? You're destructive even in your rightness. And so I think sometimes that can happen, or other times it's just that people really feel like they're doing the right thing. They're engaged in the right action. Even like what we've gone through recently, I think even as it's still kind of happening, as they're saying things to people and making phone calls and doing kind of things that they do, there's still that sense in which they feel like this is a righteous cause. We were justified in our position. These leaders were wrong in what they did. And so that's what makes it uniquely hard sometimes, is you're not dealing with the person who says, I know I'm being a gossip. I know I'm being divisive. I know I'm being a false witness of something. Usually they don't do that. It's usually there's a self-justifying thing that's always kind of playing in the background there. And so I think that's what makes it sometimes hard for leadership when they have to finally kind of take a firm stand. The person almost seems surprised. Like, well, I guess Jesus was persecuted and so am I. And it's like, well, no, you're doing something kind of destructive here and it's not helpful in any way. So I just find that that's always been a very interesting dynamic. Instead of people going, oh, what would Jesus have me do? They just go, if I'm right, doesn't matter what I do, I'm right, kind of thing. And so, it's always tough to navigate through it. So
one of all of our struggles is self-assessment, like being humble, but like seeing yourself. Like we live inside our head and we kind of see this one-way street. We don't see how others perceive us or how we're coming off or how we say things. Like it's hard to do that. Like you really have to be thoughtful about what you're like. So I don't know. I guess that stuff can only come about like the helpful criticism, or by those you're in community with, like friends, loved ones, people that are willing to say, hey, look,
Yeah.
or just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because we don't see ourselves very accurately, I think.
Well, I think you're right. I think that willing is the word that works both ways. You have to be willing to admit to yourself that you might be wrong, and a lot of people really have trouble doing that. Or you have to be willing to let go of, and realize that person isn't going to change if they're wrong,
Yeah.
And that's hard.
No, it really is. And I was thinking about that in my own world when we went through what we did with the denomination. And as things started kind of heating up and they had an attorney and they started filing lawsuits against us, and uniquely me, because I was kind of the target because I was the new guy in that was now wanting to lead the church out of the denomination or whatever else. And I remember consciously at one point, I could tell inside me that I was getting angry. So I knew when I get a conversation spinning in my head, it was rooted in anger and bitterness. And it was kind of God's grace in that, which is why then I use the love your enemies as the grounding verse that I used for the entire time of the denomination. Because I just kind of had that self-awareness of I'm not going to lead this season well, and I'm not going to lead our people well if I let this get me. And I'm now motivated by this unhealthy thing. So it was just sort of a grace of God that I just had enough self-awareness to go, I could sit there and think it's a righteous cause, but I could feel it was fueled by a furnace. My righteous cause was fiery or whatever else. And so, kind of made that shift. And so even when the final thing came from the arbitrators, the church can get out, but it's going to take a year, but Matt can't be there anymore. And so he's going to be removed from the premises for a year. And that whole decision was made. I remember because I navigated it that way, even when that came, I was just oh, okay, I'm okay. And I watched other churches that went through it with the denomination where those leaders were fueled by bitterness and kind of this is a righteous cause, and they were angry. And within a year, 2 years after everything had passed, they were still burned up, bitter, angry, not leading well. Some of them left the ministry just so Christianity's terrible, and whatever it is, And so if you do have that grace in your life that lets you know, no, you're in a bad place. You know what I mean? That is a barometer. What if it's a furnace, if I'm feeling this righteous indignation, I might be part of the problem. Not that the problem isn't still there and you have to address it, but my motives may be really unhealthy in approaching it.
But you had that willingness to step aside and let the Holy Spirit work.
Yeah, and it was really the grace of God. It was just I just realized, honestly, it's going to sound terrible. I remember one day I was in my head, and if I saw Ed Williamson, who was the head of our denomination at the time, who was really the driver behind it, I said, man, if I saw that guy in an alley, I'd love to beat him with a stick. And I remember really feeling it, oh man, I don't want to kill him. I just want to beat him with a stick. You know what I mean? And I just remember just going there is nothing godly about that at all. Nothing at all, And that was when I kind of realized I'm not at a good place. I better get in a good place and stay in a good place going through it. And I think that's sometimes also a very exhausting thing, keeping yourself in check. You knew you crossed the line, so I'm aware the line's there. And there would be days where I would be so tired by the end of the day because I would be fighting with myself inside. You want to get angry right now. You really want to get angry. You want to write, a strongly worded email and send it to Ed, or you want to do a blog and talk about how the denomination sucks or whatever it is, and resisting those impulses. The positive was, again, about a year after we had started redemption and we were past it, I just remember one day just going, wow, I have no anger at them whatsoever. Just none. It was reminds me doing the way of Jesus is liberating. You know what I mean? I think I always kind of bring it back to that. He doesn't just give us these things because he's just riddled with commands and he wants to see us obey commands. It's for our good. It's for our thriving and flourishing. So just all the more, I was kind of just reminded about some of those things. So it was weird, though, going through this. A couple of things really quick that I thought about. One was number 15 was control negatives, which was the number one thing that made Mars Hill implode. The level of control versus influence and the level of fear-mongering within the staff and elders and Driscoll and everything else. I thought, wow, he was at the height of that kind of toxicity happening when he's giving this talk, right? And so that was just one thing that kind of stood out to me. But the other thing that just stood out was how many of these we did have happen in our kind of August to March period. It wasn't just 2 of these things or 3 of these things, but there was different things. some of the people were angry because there was traditions in the youth group that had been changed. They weren't playing this raffle song anymore, and so they were mad about the raffle song. And I'm like, well, there's the tradition one. Distrust soon emerged. They didn't trust Caesar, even though they weren't double checking with Caesar on things. Just misinformation. Like even right now is, some of them have kind of gone on to Google and are leaving 1-star negative reviews about redemption and saying things in these 1-star reviews where I'm like, that's just not true. That's just flatly false, But the misinformation thing, one person tells another person and tells another person, and now they believe those things are true. Which one was it? The take up offense for another person negatives. We were seeing that too. You've hurt them and I love them, so you've hurt me. And so we're now both mad at you, kind of thing. So there was just a lot of them as I was going back through this where I'm like, oh yeah, we did have a lot of those all in play at the same time. So it gets a little crazy sometimes. With that said, then, anything else on that before we go into point number 3?
Yeah, can I have your phone number? So
You bet, man. You know what? I'll give you my home address too, so that if you just want to stop in, check in and say hi. I always love phone calls after 10 p.m. though. Make sure,
Between 12 and midnight.
That's right.
Or 10 midnight.
And especially if it's like, do it like closer to midnight, if it's to give me some tips on how I could have cleaned up my message better on Sunday. And
He's in front of the gym. He's probably not doing anything.
that's right. That's a good safe time to do it too. That's right. I'm not trying to deal with my stress in any way at the gym, so bring it then. Yeah.
The chain of command is pretty long here. There's a lot of people you gotta go through.
That's right. Very long chain of command. That's too funny. All right, so how about number 3, the conscious decision to respond versus react or retreat. So this goes back to that thing where you have to have preconditioned in your mind a way that you're going to deal with some of these things, whether even being a kind of person when you're dealing with a problem. So the first thing is 3A, you don't want to be reacting like a negative, right? So when you're dealing with a negative person, or somebody that's bothered by something, upset by something, is struggling with something, whatever else, the temptation to react like a negative is to fight fire with fire. Or if it's a group that's spun up, start gossiping about that group as much as the group is gossiping about the problem. Start seeing it in terms of my side and your side, or my group versus your group, right? Like those kinds of things are ultimately responding to negatives as a negative. And that's a risk, I think, uniquely with leadership. Like we would think it wouldn't be the case, but it's just, remember when we were talking about the qualities of an elder, and one of the things we said is elders can't be pugnacious, and more deeply embedded into that, they have to continue to shepherd the sheep that don't care for them. Right? You still have to stay in that place of, I'm going to shepherd you in love, even if you're against me in anger. And I think that's the same thing. So when you start having these things happen, so I take what we've gone through here in the last year, as these negative things were erupting, being very conscious to not get baited into that, to where now you feel like, oh, now we're in it together. Like I'm fighting you. Like, no, I'm still trying to shepherd you. You're doing things and it's not helpful, it's destructive, but we don't want to slide into just responding to negatives as a negative. Equally, what you don't want to do is 3B, you don't want to retreat like a neutral, right? So again, we don't want to be a people pleaser. We don't want to be like, well, I don't like conflict, so I'm not going to address the problem. I think one of the things that perhaps we could be accused of in what we went through this last year is maybe letting some things sit too long. There may have been a little bit of neutral in us at times on that. And what I mean by that is letting it sit too long was like 5 days. Like we didn't let anything sit really, really long, but I think we kept thinking like the wind's going to come out of the sails, the fire is going to burn down. Again, there was reasons we thought that this was going to simmer and be okay. And we probably were naive in that. And so what it allowed is it gave time for that critical spirit against Caesar, for example, to spread, and so there was like where we thought it was maybe decelerating, it was actually a regrouping. And so then it was like getting students who are going around and talking to other students to get the list of all the things that they don't like about Caesar, so that they could come to the board and be like, we've interviewed 20 kids, here's what we don't like about Caesar. And like, well, that's destructive what you did. But, we didn't know that was happening, and we probably let things sit a little too long because we thought, hey, it's going to be okay. and that was another one of those lessons learned, right?
It's probably a little hard too, because you want to also respond in love, and love always hopes, love perseveres. Like, so, you know, my guess is you guys probably had hope that they're going to turn around. Like this,
Right.
like they're not going to continue down this road, or like,
Yeah,
so
100%.
versus like jumping on stuff right away is that, yeah, it's got to be
Yeah.
a tough balance.
Yeah, no, and I like I said, if I look back on it, like I said, there's a couple of things that I go, I wish we would have moved on quicker, but I don't think it would have changed the outcome necessarily. And you're right, I think there was a level of, one of the persons involved in this is a board member, and you're trusting in kind of spiritual maturity there, and like that's going to hold the day. You know, they were also, you know, had been in vocational ministry. They'd been missionaries on the field. Like, they know what it's like to be criticized and critiqued and everything else. And so I think there was kind of a banking on all of that history and all of that assumed spiritual maturity that was kind of the hoping it's going to all pan out. And part of it even being for her, she was stepping out of being a youth leader. So all the more we thought, well, she's not even going to be a youth leader anymore. So it's going to be okay. And it just, like I said, it took on a life of its own that we didn't fully see. And so from that, then by the time the dumpster fires were everywhere, we were like, oh, now how do you try to put all of this out, you know? And that's kind of the trick. But with that, you still want to respond with 3C. You want to respond like a positive. And so this is where it's going to be like trying to invest, to talk, to try to understand where this other side is coming from. So if you have a factious person or a factious group, you know, trying to attempt peace by going, what is bothering you so much? What's the problem that we need to try to figure out how to solve together? Trying to do that, you know, with humility and transparency. And, you know, I use a term a lot, which is playing poker with all your cards face up. Like, you know, that's what you're trying to do with people. Like, I'm trying to disarm you, even in the way I'm going to go about trying to figure out what's going on and why it's going on and that kind of thing. The trick there sometimes, not the trick, the reality though, and I think it's something that we experience in this, is even if you do all of that and you execute it perfectly, it does not guarantee that the person on the other side of the table is going to respond in kind. It still may be just they're certain this is wrong, or they're certain you're wrong, or they're certain this is broken, and you just got to face what's going on with that. So, but from that, we're going to go into number 4 then, which is 20 ways to be a positive, from 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. So again, when Mark is doing this whole thing, he's talking about the fact that Paul's writing to Timothy. Timothy's in an environment where he's got positives and negatives and neutrals all in the church of Ephesus, right? And there's clearly division happening, and I think he's trying to inspire Timothy. So literally, these 20 things in point number 4 are just walking through the passages, right? And we're just giving it kind of a title for each little chunk of the passage. And so the first thing we're going to see in 4a, number 1, is that positives emphasize what they are for instead of simply what they're against, right? So in thinking about being not just a positive leader in the church, but a positive person in the church, we always want to come at that from the perspective of, hey, man, this is what I'm for, and I'm going to be more the inspirer of what I'm for and not simply just be the person that's bringing up what I'm against. And so I think the difference here is saying, I would rather leverage influence, right? Like when Driscoll was talking about kind of the control versus influence. It's saying part of the power of the positive person is saying, I want to woo you to a thing. I want to win you to a thing. I want to influence you to a thing. And so that's much more positive than saying, I'm the leader. I have the authority. You stop doing it, right? Like if you go there first, you usually have somebody, if they're bothered or frustrated or, you know, not liking what the church is doing, and you confront them with, I'm the authority, you're going to elevate their friction with you, you know, really fast. So again, it's just always trying to be that what we're for. So kind of that idea of remind them of these things, like it's a positive, remind them of the good things, remind them of where we're going, why we're going there, what we're doing with that, everything else. And so that's what they do. They focus more on what they're for than not simply what they're against. Going on page 153, number 2, positives use their God-given authority, right? So again, there is a difference between authority and authoritarian. And so authority is to say, you know what, I like as a board member here and as a pastor, I have a responsibility to safeguard the church and that kind of thing. But even in that space, I want to do it trying to be reasonable, trying to help inform a person of maybe why we're doing this or not doing that, or In the case of what we went through, I would be sitting down with them and being like, I hear you, but I can't agree with you. I get where you're coming from, but I don't see it at the same level you do. And so there was always that sense of like, I still have a responsibility to say I can't go where you're going, or I can't authorize what it is you're demanding that we do. But I'm not going to just flat out be like, you know what, I'm in charge, you're not. You know, you're not an elder, I am an elder. Tough. Like you don't want to go. And I've been in places like the split that when I was an intern, that's exactly what happened. The elders were being pressed by old members, and the elders, instead of saying, how do we win these people over? They said, we're an authority, you're not, and you need to stop being divisive and stop talking. And that just threw gas on the fire, right? So it went from 10 people frustrated at the board to within 6 weeks, 300 people, like ugly, And part of it too, I would say in what happened there, one of the things I think the leadership did wrong there is they said, it's always going to get you in trouble if you do it. They're like, we don't care what the bylaws say. This is what the Bible says, right? And so there was this, like, the bylaws that these staff members all came into agreeing to. Now they were like, well, those bylaws are all about like democratic form of government in the church where the members vote, and we think all that control should be in the hands of the elders. So the members, 10 at first and up to 300 eventually, are like, you guys aren't following the bylaws and you're just enacting new policies and rules and procedures. And they're like, but biblically eldership is right. And this idea of voting members is wrong. And therefore they use we're the true authority of God, and therefore we don't have to submit to the bylaws. That's what blew the place apart right there. And what was wild about it is that the church had grown fourfold in this period of time that these leaders were there. So the church was now, a couple of thousand people, but the original members were feeling very pressed, and the argument over the bylaws was like their kind of anchor point. All these other people, nobody became members. So suddenly the members are now getting lawyers, and they're forcing the board to do things that the board doesn't want to do. And then you had all this bunch of people that love the board and love the pastors and are confused by these members over here that they feel like they're stiff-arming, and it was terrible. It was terrible. There was one meeting in particular. It was an informational meeting. And it was packed, man. The balcony was packed. The whole sanctuary was packed. And literally you had the board up in front, and then you had the faction that was against the board in a tight, area of the church. And the whole night it would be one side would make a point and they would amen. And then the other side would make a point and all these others would amen. And it was just, the abuse of amen that night was incredible. And it just reminded me again, where this board, they could have coached these people and heard them out and even said, let's vote to change the bylaws. But they were just like, nope, we're in charge, you're not. We don't have to listen, and you need to fall in line. Yep, fell apart. And neither church had peace for decades after that, honestly. I'd say the church, because I ended up going with the church that split off, because that was the bulk of us. I'd say it went through 20 years of instability. And the other church went through about 20 years of instability too. And so it just set down roots. There was a spirit in there, that was just kind of really, really painful all the way around. Divided families, divided friendships, it was terrible, man. And it was dumb. It didn't have to happen. So again, positive use their God-given authority, but they don't act authoritatively. So charge them before God. Any questions or comments on that? I went down a little bit of a rabbit trail of my own past there, but all right. Number 3, positives invest their words. All right. So he tells Timothy, do not quarrel about words, which does no good, but only ruins the hearers, right? So again, when it comes to the words that we use when we're dealing with somebody that's having a problem with whatever we're doing in the church or in our faith or whatever else, again, just think in terms of I want to persuade them. I don't want to provoke them, right? And it's really important, because what you're trying to do is not just get clarity, but you're trying to lower their agitation, right? Because emotions are what they are. They just flick on. And so I've seen where there can be this, like somebody's disagreeing and a leader's making a choice and they kind of want to put a person in their place. That's provoking usually. So if it's like, I don't agree with you, I think you're being kind of dumb, I'm thinking that in my head, I'm just going to shut you down a little bit right now. you're going to look for greater trouble versus you're hearing them and you want to try to figure out how to persuade them to think about this differently or see things from a different point of view kind of thing. So always this thinking in terms of I'm going to use my words as invested words to persuade versus to provoke.
Pastor, you need to be a pretty good diplomat.
You really do. And it's funny because I would say, and not that I'm perfect at it by any stretch, but one of the things that had been kind of affirmed in me in my earlier years, and it kind of carries through for the most part, is that I have my gifting apart is diplomacy. So like as far as like I can get like a church to go in a direction, but usually you don't have to blow up a bunch of stuff to get it to go in the direction. Like figuring out how to do that. That's in part why they asked me if I'd candidate for the job at Duval Church, because I had done consulting with them, because they're like, hey, we've heard that you've done church merges and you're pretty good at creating stability in churches and creating healthy churches, and we're sickly. What are we doing wrong, kind of thing. And so, I think diplomacy is really, really important. And I would say I know many pastors that are not good at it, because what happens is they'll hear a critique and they take it as a personal attack. So it's, if you say something bad about, you don't like this about the church, you're saying you don't like it about me, because they see themselves as so intertwined. They and the church are kind of one. That then instead of it being like, I want to figure out how to move the needle in your life, it's I'm being now defensive or self-defensive. And that can be a deep problem. Like, go back to the church that went through the split. Our lead pastor, great communicator, very gifted, and equally had an insecurity that ran so deep. And when you triggered his insecurity, it was rage. So, I mean, he even joked about it. Like, he's like, how many people he would run over with his bus and then slam it in reverse and run over him again. Like, for him, it was like a joke. But he was weirdly insecure. And insecurity comes out in two ways. You either get sheepish or you get kind of feisty. And he did the feisty one. And so if anybody kind of crossed him or anybody questioned him, I mean, that's how I got fired. I ended up getting fired from under him, because we were at a conference and we were crossing the street going from an In-N-Out Burger. I'll never forget it. And he goes, hey, Matt, who do you think should run all the staff meetings? Now, Chris was most of the time not in the office. He came in like twice a week for half a morning, and that was it. He studied at home the rest of the time. He wasn't a real personable guy. He wasn't like a relational guy. But we had a children's ministry pastor that literally every week we go and check on all of us. How you guys doing today? What's up? And he's just a great guy, invested into the staff. So we're crossing the street. Who should run the staff meetings? I'm like, oh man, you should have Bill Krause run the meetings. He like, we're all connected to him. And he looked at me like this look. I will never forget the look. It was, you gave the wrong answer. It was supposed to be you, Chris. You should continue to lead the staff meetings. You're amazing. You are my favorite person. I said that. A week later, our associate pastor comes in and he's like, Chris wants you removed from your position. I'm like, dude, wow, what happened? He's like, yep, you crossed him. Yeah. So, yeah. Fun times.
Sometimes the problem is the leadership.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, and that same spirit drove the split, because then people were critical of, again, how they were overriding the bylaws, and he took it personal. It was him, not just an issue. And so he retaliated like it was personal. And he struggled with that a lot.
With, like you were saying, words and diplomacy, and you think about how you present yourself, but you also, I think, can diffuse a lot of problems just by being a good listener and letting people know you're hearing them.
Yeah.
That can oftentimes just kind of take the whole wind out of the...
Yeah, no, I think so too. And he struggled with that for whatever set of reasons. It was funny, I was talking to a friend of mine that he interned under this guy also way back in the day, because I interned under Chris and then my friend Corey did. And Corey went and visited him here in the last couple of years, because Chris is pastoring a church in California. And Corey goes, I've decided after all these years that Chris has probably got like Asperger's or something. Like, he's just on the spectrum somehow, because there's just some disconnect relationally in him. And so everything is just very black and white and binary, and if you cross him, it's an insecurity that comes out, and it's just, he'll let you have it, both barrels. Yeah, it's pretty wild that way.
Mark?
Huh?
Maybe like Mark?
Like Mark. No, honestly, it was uncanny. Like, it's a kind of leader. Because this has been getting called out a lot in recent years, where you get these leaders that are very gifted and talented and excellent communicators, can build great church systems and all of this, but they have that
Did Chris
thing.
become a pastor when he was young?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But not super young, because he was, in his 20s when he became a college pastor at Grace Community Church under MacArthur, and then eventually became MacArthur's executive pastor, and then filled in MacArthur for 6 months when John was on a sabbatical. So he was kind of a top dog around there, and then came to Spokane.
It seems like
It's a wild dude.
kind of a theme, like young pastors just don't have the life seasoning, who I was listening to somebody who was like, nobody should be a lead pastor in their 20s kind of thing.
Right.
Which we've done tons of in the last 20, 30 years here.
Yeah.
Just with church plants and stuff, it was easy to do that.
Yeah.
I think that was part of Mark's problem, is he just became a pastor at 25 years old.
Yeah.
He didn't know how to lead people, and he hadn't been humbled.
Yeah. And then there was this blow up success, which even just drives it more, right? So you haven't had and he got into this weird place where, he was deciding the only people that can mentor me are people who have churches bigger than me.
Mine.
Right.
I remember him saying
When he cut.
he said that to Piper.
I know.
It was
When
ridiculous.
I know. And it was like, I'm cutting Piper loose because this church is not. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
It was
I know. It's so wild. But it was that thing. And I think he really thought, no, that's right. That's smart. But, the pride that can get in there. Because, even my predecessor at Duval Church, the first week I was there, maybe I shared the story at Praxis, but he called me and he starts chewing me out. Just chewing me out. I'm like, I don't even know this dude, And so he's chewing out for a long time, and I finally just said, dude, you're bitter. You're bitter. And he goes, so what? I am. Maybe I am. What's it to you? I'm like, you called me. Like, what are we doing here? You're the one that did this or whatever. But it does go back to, I think sometimes, particularly for lead pastors, they can get their identity very wrapped up in their church. And then with that, if they get hurt by the church, they want to punish it. So again, they can become the most toxic negative in the system because they also have the biggest influence in there too. So that's probably the worst of all worlds, is when you get the head or chief leaders in that space, and they will inflict all kinds of damage. And so when he called me and he was chewing me out, he was mad that the church was maybe going to be able to proceed and go forward. He wanted it to die. Like when he left, he wanted the punishment that Duval Church just dies, implodes. And then they hired me, and he was hearing about stuff, and he's like, oh, maybe it's going to survive. I better call this guy and chew him out. And it just reminds me of, again, the negative, bitter spirit that can happen for leaders. One of the last things he said to me, because I finally got him settled down after about an hour and a half, just talking. I mean, it was a long conversation. It was funny, man. I came out of the office, and Dana's like, who are you yelling at on the phone? Because I don't yell, but he was just so, And anyway, one of the last, he goes, I'm just going to give you one last piece of advice for all those people at Duval Church. He goes, you get them to fall in line with you. And if they don't fall in line, he goes, you whip it out and piss all over all of them.
Wow.
And I literally just had one of those cough laughs, like, oh, well, I got to go. You know what I mean? But it was potently showed just how angry and bitter he was at that church, and those people and everything else.
Quote you on that?
I know. You know what was crazy? He went on to become.
Yeah, I'm gonna let them all know that.
Yeah, I'm gonna share that.
Yeah, give
No.
them your number too.
But what was crazy is that at that point he was back in a church in the denomination, right? And within 2 years of that, he was the regional superintendent for the Free Methodists in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm like, this guy's toxic, and he's training pastors and leading stuff, and just went to Phoenix, man. Starting another church, call it good. And he's more Mark than ever right now.
I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I watched a couple of things he's done recently where I'm just like, because I thought after everything, he talked about being like the fatherly figure, the wiser, a little less reckless like he was as a young man. Oh no, he's Mark times 10. It's pretty impressive. So, and heartbreaking at the same time. So, all right, we're not getting anywhere fast. All right, number 4, positives do their best, right? He says, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved. And so I would say the way we best do our best is that we are A, dependent, and B, repentant, right? Like I think that we're always in that space. It probably even highlights some of these things, the dangers of when a leader becomes negative. If they are not perpetually in the space of I'm dependent on Jesus and I'm repentant on the things that I need to address in my life and then really go in a different direction, you're going to get into trouble. So positives do their best in those areas. Number 5, positives work hard, right? That's what Paul goes on to say. Be a worker who has no need to be ashamed, right? And so I would say part of the working hard is always thinking in terms of what's most important in a leadership context, at least, is to be more concerned with building people than building systems or managing systems. Like it's really easy sometimes in leadership things to be way more about the system. And really the church is about the people, right? And so again, that's just a way that you can be a proactive positive. You're working hard to really be a builder of people and making that the big investment. Next, number 6, positives study hard. That's why Paul says rightly handling the word of truth. In Greek, it means cutting it straight. Probably something Paul's borrowing from his tent making skills. He had to be able to cut patterns straight. So a little bit of that same idea. And so part of the way we always stay positive is we work hard to know the scriptures so we can share those scriptures in positive and encouraging ways. Number 7, positives avoid getting drawn into endless arguments. That's what Paul goes on to say. But avoid irreverent babble, only leads to people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene. Again, there is all sorts of dumb things that you can get into. It's not important. You know what I mean? And I think there are some churches in some contexts where it's all about that. It's all about the argument, actually. And it's like, man, there's some things we should care about, and there's a lot of things we don't need to get all that fired up about. And I think that's one of the strengths of redemption is that we have a lot of diversity internally. We have a lot of diversity in our staff and everything else. But everybody kind of understands there's the major things and there's minor things, and we can keep those segregated. So again, endless arguments just don't help anybody. And again, I've been in environments where everything's an argument. When he joked about the 20-something white Bible college student that's a Calvinist, that was totally me. All the way into like my late 20s, I was terrible, man. I fought about everything. It was dumb, right? So, I was a mess back then. All right, number 8. Positives warn the sheep about the wolves, right? So he's talking about Hymenaeus, Hymenaeus is kind of causing some trouble in there and everything else. He goes, man, I know he's stirring up stuff. And again, you got to make sure that part of your positive approach is warning the sheep about the wolves. And I would say there's 2 kinds of wolves, if I use it metaphorically. I think there are outside ones, so disbelieving people that want to wreck the faith of believing people. Like that's a more clear-cut one. And then there's the inside ones. And the inside ones, in my opinion, are far more destructive than the outside ones, right? So the outside ones, they kind of do it like crock pots. They're just always out there, but you got to go kind of hear them to get that. Inside, they're like microwaves. They can cause trouble really quick. And I go back to what we've just gone through as a church, right? Where I'm very cautious to use the term wolves with these people because they still really love these people. But I go, their internal ability to wreak havoc over people's faith and over our church was way more elevated because of their placement. You know what I mean? Where, again, there's people in this community that go, oh, all the evangelicals are crazy and da-da-da-da. They're not really that great of a threat to us, though, technically as a church. They just have opinions of us. But when you have people internally that start to stir up stuff, this is where, again, leaders have to step in and warn the sheep about the wolves, which is, again, that's what the elders had to start doing with people that were kind of connected to the friend group of these people and had the proximity. We had to start getting in there and being like, you're hearing some stuff. This isn't the case. This isn't the case. Here's the giant file of everything we've logged over the course of months or whatever else. And we were working really hard to try to undo the damage that was being done. But trying to do it in a way still that was like, I'm warning you, but I'm not wanting to throw these people under the bus. Because the risk is when you have divisive people, to kind of combat them, you can also load up way more against them than what is really warranted.
So was it pretty successful?
Way better than I thought. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. So, but because certainly, Tucker and Dana were uniquely connected to this broader friend group. And I would say Dana played a pretty important role in this whole thing too, because she was in the network of the friend group. And so, but there was, like we had one couple that within a couple of days were like, we're leaving Redemption, take us off the roster, all this stuff. And I'm like, no, I think they were misinformed. They were hearing things and they reacted really fast. And so, I went out of my way to reach out to them, reached out to their parents even, who I was friends with, and they eventually ended up coming back to redemption and plugging back in and everything else. But it took like those efforts of that. There were some others that were like, I don't know who to believe. I'm hearing this and I'm hearing that. And then what helped there is by sitting down, we're like, well, what are you hearing? Well, we're hearing that everybody's leaving the church is broke. And there's these things that were just clearly fiction. They're just misinformation. So then we're able to, here's our books, here's our attendance numbers, and so that helped them go, oh, well, if they're lying about this, what else are they lying about? You guys are showing us that these things aren't true. So then we think maybe other things aren't true too. And so that got them settled and they're like, we're going to stay at redemption. So there was things like that we just had to do. But it was having to be really thoughtful in that process too, to not, like I said, not vilify the people who are being divisive or extra vilify them. Let their behaviors stand on their own merit without trying to load it up with a lot of extra stuff. Because I think that's always going to be the temptation too, is to want to make your point. You kind of want the bad guy to sound like the real bad guy. And I think there were certainly times where we're like, no, we love these people. I think there's other things in play with this. And we were always trying to make sure we were very delicate with that. But also anytime we could clarify, we wanted to clarify. And so I'd say, I don't know, Tucker, in the end, I'd say we seem to retain a good chunk of the friend group. They seem to have stayed at redemption. I know for sure of 2 families for sure that departed with it. Everybody else, at least for now, is sort of in place, I think. But we thought, honestly, it could be as many as 10 to 12 families total that would initially leave if we weren't trying to run damage control and try to be as available as possible. Even when an email had gone out to all parents in the youth group, that was saying stuff that was inaccurate. So literally it was myself and Scott, and maybe Dana was a part of that first one too, I can't remember, literally calling every family, and just getting ahead of it. Hey, you might've got an email, just checking, want to make sure, that kind of thing. So it was just trying to be very mindful of looking out for, in the vernacular here, the neutrals. I didn't know there was a problem. I got an email from Amberlynn Clausen that says, oh, here's a bunch of problems. Now what do I do? So, that's where we had to be really on it and just have some personal contact with everybody. So that was kind of the heart.
A sheep could become a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
That's not necessarily a salvation. Like, it's not a goat. They're not a goat.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean they're an unbeliever. It just means that they're being a very negative believer.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because I, for example, I look at the Colossians. I don't have any question about their faith in Jesus. I don't have any questions about, are they saved? Like, that was never like in the equation of it. It was like, these are people that I think love Jesus, but they're not doing things the way Jesus would have them do, which is not uncommon among Christians. You know what I mean? Like, we're all going to struggle with those things at some point. The problem here was people that love Jesus, and I would say know the right thing to do, but for whatever set of reasons really feel that their rightness is overriding the need to do the right thing, right? And so whether it's a just cause, whether it's righteous anger, all the labels we tend to use to justify not doing things in Jesus-like ways. And I'd say it continues to be that way, where let's say that we as a board were truly unjust and we were ungodly and we set up this boundary with them and they're not allowed on the property and we remove them from leadership and everything else. Let's say we 100% sinned against them in every conceivable way. Well, Jesus' response to that is shake the dust off and still love your enemies and don't try to deal with evil by doing more evil, overcome evil with good. There's all these things that certainly the scriptures would call them to do, which is not retaliate and not continue to stir up strife but they're kind of overriding that right now. And they're like, nope, we can still say things and gossip and misinform and I'm like, well, no, you're not supposed to do any of that. You can, you're doing it. But I think, again, they're legitimately Christian people, just not behaving like Jesus in this area.
Is it Matthew 18 or 19, the discipline piece?
18 is the one where it's kind of all the way through, like it's a sequence of excommunication.
So did they they not fall into that to where like you get to the point where you treat them as an unbeliever?
Right. Yeah, we didn't use the Matthew 18 as our pattern. And there was a couple of different reasons for that. What we really did with it is we used and we'll see it at the very end of this module, we used the Titus 3 about warn a divisive person twice, and then after that have nothing to do with them, which for us was then setting a boundary with them. Because again, in part what we were trying to spare in the whole thing is like, we love these people. What we're not wanting to do is get up in front of the church and be like, this family, we didn't want to subject them to that either. And we didn't think it would be fruitful. And it just was really an impasse. If you're not going to meet with us, but you're still going to be divisive, then we've warned you more than 2 times, probably 8. Try to get together with you. It's not happening. You keep escalating things. Okay, we're going to have nothing more to do with you. And since we're the ones tasked with overseeing the church and the property, this is the boundary we can set. The nothing more to do with you is you're no longer permitted on the premises. We could set that. And so it was very much used in the tithes thing. Now, what was interesting about it is he very much wanted us to do the Matthew 18 thing with him, because what he wanted in that was to be able to have a platform, like get it out to everybody that we've been excommunicated, and now everybody will come and ask us why, and we can now tell our side of the story. So he was literally like almost demanding we do Matthew 18. And we're like, that's not the process we were using. We're using this other process. And so, matter of fact, even the last Sunday, so, we sent an email to them, and then they were out at that point, and then their kids came for a final Sunday to say bye to friends and turn in shirts and everything else. And I had their daughter come to me twice and say, my dad wants you to publicly excommunicate him. No, publicly banish him. And I'm just like, well, I don't think we should be having the conversation. I mean, you're a sweet kid. I don't think you should be the ambassador of this kind of a conversation. But they really wanted it because they wanted a public forum in some ways too. And so all the more, it was just like, I kind of know what you're doing there, but I don't think that's fruitful. And it's not quite the spirit in which we were operating, or even the passage that we were using in relationship to it. So, yeah. It is tough, man. Number 9, positives rejoice that God rules the church, right? But God's firm foundation stands, bearing the seal. The Lord knows those who are his. And so again, part of just being positive is reminding, hey, Jesus is in control. He's our senior pastor. You're always trying to remind that too, especially when somebody's kind of spun up about something. It's like, you know what? Jesus is still in charge. Jesus is on the throne. It's okay. We can work this through.
He either is or he ain't.
He is or he ain't. And if he ain't,
I read that this morning.
I like that. That's pretty good, man. He is or he ain't.
He is or he ain't.
I like it. Number 10, positives practice repentance before preaching it. Let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity. So again, part of this is just trying to be like a leader that's always in the space of leading from a positive place. Means you're also confronting your own sin itself. Right? Because again, if that gets entrenched, it's in you in some capacity, then your ability to lead well is going to fracture in ways you don't even foresee. You know what I mean? Because there's just something about that, like sin has like a root system to it, where it's like you might have this sin over here and you think it's going to be completely unrelated to your effectiveness in leading, but it's not. It's still going to connect somehow. Or you got this little closet thing here, it will affect somehow this way over here. It just has the capacity to do it. And so all the more, like I go back to, Chris was the guy that I interned with and eventually got fired and everything else. And then 3 years later, he was removed from his position for misusing church funds for personal purposes, right? So here's the thing over here, and he's a real angry, feisty, insecure leader, but you never know, is he an insecure, feisty, abusive leader because he's on the takeover? Like you just don't know what's in play. And there was a certain entitledness even, like, well, I should be allowed to use the church credit card to buy personal stuff. Why not? Why? Why do you think you're entitled to that, But I think there was a certain elevated sense of self in there too. And, this church exists because I'm here, and it's grown because of my teaching. And if I use a church credit card to buy stuff for my kids and my wife, I should be allowed to. Well, can all the other pastors do that? Well, no. Okay, neither can you. But then when he was confronted, he lied about it because, again, it was going to make him look bad, and there was just no getting out of it. It was too easy to paper trail it. Now, I think the way the church handled him was just as abusive as what he would do to people. So that was the downside of it. Like he even said, the monster I made ate me, and there's some truth to that. Tragically, I don't think Chris learned all of his lessons either. He's still kind of the same kind of guy. Huh?
Do any of this?
I would like to think a lot of us actually do. I like to think we do.
Seem like a living epistle, like an open book that everybody can read.
Yeah.
And they can, and that's what I appreciate about Redemption is that the leadership is like that. And I know who they are because they're vulnerable and they present that vulnerability and want to be Jesus-like. Mm-hmm. So I love it.
Well, that's very kind words. And like I said, in the instance with this former pastor Chris, I was hoping because it was so tragic and crazy and everything else that he was going to come out the other side as a kinder, gentler version of himself. And he did for a while. But then it's the old habits thing, and it just kind of eventually came back in the same force, where it was still very, I remember one time he was telling me, he's like, oh yeah, man, I blow through personal assistants, man. I just make them cry all the time, and then they finally quit, and I just got another one. I'm just like, you're a pastor? It was so weird. But he saw it as almost like a bravado thing, it was really good that he would make his secretaries cry, but just because he had so much bandwidth, he'd give them so much, and I just I can't keep up with it sometimes. So, and he still got a little bit of that spirit in him, so that's a little on the unfortunate side. Let's see. Number 11, positives use their passion to be a better servant, right? And so this is where Paul gets into kind of these different vessels that are used for honor and that kind of thing. And so I'd say, again, when you're leading in the context of a church, or you're leading a small group or a study or any kind of thing, you really do want to lead from that place of passion, of love, fruit of the Spirit, that kind of thing. So it's just another way that you're going to be much more effective than leading from authority or just strong words or whatever it is. Number 12, positives grow up quickly. Literally, Paul says, flee your youthful passions, and so run from immature, youthful distractions or destructions. That's not going to help anybody. Number 13, positives seek righteousness, faith, love, and peace with urgency. That idea of pursue righteousness has, in Greek, this, pursue it now, don't wait till tomorrow kind of attitude. And so everything should be done with that sense of urgency. Number 14, positives grow in discernment. I would say, when he says have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies, they only breed quarrels. The discernment is kind of knowing what to die for versus what to divide over, versus what to debate, what to discuss, what to ditch altogether, it's not even an important conversation. I think having learned that over the years, like I said, in my 20s, everything was worth dying for, so to speak, or dividing over. And I took a certain level of glee in that. My closed-fisted thing would take both hands, and it would just, there was so much. And so everything was die and divide. And I think nowadays, probably even more than ever, it's even less debate, it's probably discuss. It just seems like that's always going to be much more fruitful. Or there's just some things where I ditch it altogether because I'm it doesn't matter. Who cares? It's not even going to be helpful to have those conversations. Number 15, positives are kind, like Jesus. The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone. One of the phrases I like to use a lot is you want to win the person, you don't want to win a point. You know what I mean? You don't want to win an argument, really. You want to win the person over. Because if you have the right answer but with the wrong attitude, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You're not going to really get them to have a buy-in to what you need to do. Or if you're having somebody that's a negative right now or a critic or whatever it is, you're better to be kind to them to try to win them than you are to go, well, we clearly disagree and I think you're wrong, so let's move on. I think it's just working to try to figure out how you can be as kind as possible. Number 16, positives harness the opportunity to teach their people, right? So he goes into verse 24, not just not being quarrelsome, but able to teach, right? Everything teaches. All opportunity or all circumstances are an opportunity, right? I think even in what we went through, that was one of the things that we were bringing up is as the kids were maybe struggling with transition and they were struggling with Caesar as the leader versus what they'd had before with Jesse and things like that. We went, that was an opportunity for the youth leaders to come around the kids and say, hey, here's how we navigate sadness. Here's how we navigate changes. Here's how we navigate. But instead it was like, you're bothered and you have every right to be bothered. You don't like the changes and you have every right to not like the changes. It was a lot more like that. So then of course the kids feel validated by leaders that are saying, we're allowed to be bothered and we're going to get increasingly bothered. And it didn't teach the right things when they had an opportunity. It taught the wrong things. And even now with this whole thing we're doing now with Austin and merging youth groups and everything else, it came up when we did an interview with them last Tuesday night. Where it was like, well, some kids are going to struggle because they've had a hard year. It's already been a lot of change and transition. And it was great because even in that, Austin was like, yeah, it'll be a really good opportunity. He saw the positive. It's a really good opportunity to be able to coach to this in a different kind of way. And I go, that's it. Everything's an opportunity. Everything teaches, right? Doesn't matter what it is. Anything on this before I rifle through these last few? Cool. Number 17, positives suffer patiently like Jesus. So Paul tells Timothy, patiently endure evil. There's going to be lots of disappointments in the church. There's going to be lots of disappointments in the Christian life and in Christian faith and everything else. And again, I think especially when you're dealing with sometimes with division in the church, you want to suffer patiently, right? Because if you get impatient, you get bitey, or you stop being like Jesus or whatever else. And so there has to be a conscious decision for that. I remember, this is probably 5 years ago now, I had read a book called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. And it was just going through all the early writings, and they found that the most dominant theme the church wrote about was patience, like the church leaders and stuff. And so I decided to make that like an intentional part of my daily life to practice patience. So if I go to Safeway, I pick the longest line. If I'm on 405, I pick the slowest lane. Like doing things that force me to be patient, just so I could practice it. And I've found that it pays off dividends. And yet you have to kind of practice the patience. You have to put yourself in places to have to practice it to get good at it. But the more you do that, the better.
It decreases
anxiety.
It also decreases anxiety.
Yeah, you know what?
Get used to doing it that way.
Yeah. But I had to be really conscientious about it. So yeah, I'm like, still, it was funny. There was a big long line at Safeway for getting medication or whatever, and I'd been there like 20 minutes before and there was nobody, and I had to come back to pick it up, and now there's like 8 people, and so I get to the back and then some gal comes up behind me and she's like, why do I always come here and it's like 8 deep? I'm like, this is your moment to practice patience. So we'll do it together. Number 18, positives correct gently. All right, so Paul says, hey man, here's how you correct your opponents with gentleness. And I would say under this, don't give a negative more fuel than they already have, right? So if you're dealing with somebody that's struggling with a thing, the more you're gentle with them, the more you might get some traction with those things. Number 19, positives desire good for their enemies, right? And then that's where Paul goes on to say, may God perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth, that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. This is that idea, especially for eldership stuff. But again, when you have somebody that's mad at you, you still have to shepherd them. You're not allowed to take it personal. You're going to want to. It's going to be tempting to. But you go, no, man, Jesus told me to love my enemies, which means I do good to them, I pray for them, and I bless them. He gave me a roadmap, and that's the roadmap that I want to play by. And then number 20, positives use their energy to win converts, not arguments. That's why he talks about always doing the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry, that kind of thing. And so, again, next time we're going to look at apologetics, and I have the same attitude about apologetics. Some apologists that I watch, I go, you're making me mad, and I agree with the faith you're promoting, but I'm agitated by you because you're so busy trying to win the argument. You're not trying to win the audience. You're not trying to win the people. You're just trying to win the point. I listened to these two guys debate on a podcast recently, and Ellen listened to the same one, not, at a different time. And she's like, by the end, I was so angry. He was so condescending. And I go, that's what's crazy. Like, he might be right, but he was so condescending in the end. You're just like, not helping anybody. Nobody's getting one over to your argument here. So we're always trying to think in terms of converts, not simply arguments. So anything on that last little bit there? Cool. We're going to even be done a little bit early because we're going to just wind it up here on the bottom of page 155, number 5, final resort for dealing with negatives. Warn, censor, and remove. Yeah. So here's the thing, 5A, some people will not be won over. Right? They're just not going to be won over. And so you warn them, right? Which is you talk, you put them on notice, like, hey, this is stuff we're concerned about. And then you kind of censor them, which is kind of this idea of like a clear request to like, you got to stop doing this. You can't keep being divisive this way. And then that third step would be then to remove, which depending on what you do, it could be the excommunication in Matthew chapter 18. It could be just have nothing more to do with them in Titus 3. Like there's different apparatuses in the New Testament for different conditions and that kind of thing. But I still think you need to work really hard to try to win them over until you realize there's just no way you're going to get there. I would say that was what was true of our process in the last year. I think, even though I feel like we probably let some things sit too long, I think the amount of runway that we had invested into trying to win them over and win them back and get it figured out, like I think we did a lot there. And certainly I think some said we probably let that go too long and we probably should have had a harder line sooner. I needed my conscience to be there. That I was the slowest of the board members to finally say, let's go ahead and set this boundary. So I was the last one to agree to it. And for me, it was because I didn't just want to be like, I'm fatigued, I'm tired of this. I didn't want those to be my motives, that I was just beat. You know what I mean? I wanted to be like, nope, my conscience feels like it's the right move to make at this point. And it probably would have gone another week-ish had not there been a text from her that said, give me my class back, and eventually I might meet with the board, but I'm only going to do it if like 4 outsiders come to hold the board accountable to how they're going to handle me. And that was when I finally went, this is not fixable. There is no, as soon as it's give me my stuff back and I'll see when I'll meet with you, and the board isn't really the authority on this one. I'm going to bring other people in to hold you guys accountable to your, like, yeah, I'm there finally. You know what I mean? I get it. This isn't going to resolve, and I kept hoping, but it didn't. So 5B, those who won't must be stopped so as to save the neutrals from being converted to negatives who further divide the flock. And that was kind of that idea of like, negatives can turn neutrals into negatives. They just can, because a neutral is going to be, well, you're my friends and they're my friends and I don't know who to believe, and they can get soured depending on the voices that are kind of in their ear or whatever else. And so that was, I think, the stuff that we had to start to really address as some of the emails were going out, like in, I'm trying to think, December, January was when they started sending emails to people, and we started to have it get ahead of it or whatever else. There was just, when I would talk to somebody, they're like, well, I don't know, because, she's my friend, and would she really be like this? And would she say those things? And would she do this? And you're just like, no, I'm telling you, this is not rooted in what's really happening here. And so I would experience it firsthand with somebody that was just like, I don't know which way to lean right now. I'm very confused because I love our church, but this is my friend. What do I do? I'm like, well, I gotta try to start having a conversation and get them a little bit re-anchored in what the realities are before us and kind of what's happening and how we got there and everything else. So you do have to at some point really step in, or you're going to have more people that are getting pulled into the fray of the problem, which serves nobody, in the end. So, and so in our case, that last passage was it. People that are stirring up division, warn them once, warn them twice. After that, have nothing more to do with them. And so we knew we had to make that decision. And so we just used the familiar language of the boundary as the way to do it. So even when, so Jeff Hansen met with me because initially they were going to go to Adventure Church. So he's like, I just want to know, are they like excommunicated? Are they under church discipline? What's the scenario? I said, no, it's not like that. I said, yeah, they were divisive and it wasn't helpful. And we set up a boundary. I said, but I want them to be in your church and I want them to begin to heal and I want them to find some peace and I want them to move past this. So I said, no, they're not. We're not handling this like truly an excommunication. It's a little different, this Titus passage. And so, it gave space for them, hopefully, to integrate someplace, and we wouldn't be like, no, they're, Now, and with that, we say, hey, the doors are always open. We're always willing to talk. If you ever want to meet, totally.
If we're in Matthew 18 and they were removed from the church, and then Jeff called you, would that then be something where, you would advise them, like, I wouldn't let these people in the church?
Yeah, kind of. Because I think what I would let them know that, hey, from our church's position, this is an excommunication. Whether you honor that in your church or not, that's up to you. But this is how we're seeing it. So I don't know if I'd put as much pressure on him to be like, almost like I wouldn't want it to be like, if you don't honor this, then I'm going to look at you in a different way. Like that would be a decision for him to make because not every church values it in the same way. Now, in light of that, Adventure, I think, would do that. Like if it was legitimately like an excommunication, I think Jeff would say, okay, we're gonna honor your guys' excommunication, and we'll just say, hey, yeah, you got to go back and make that right with them. So this is not going to be a landing spot for you. I mean, we'll counsel you to go do the right thing, but
back in the first century, there weren't really multiple
right.
church options in the same city, right? So
right.
If you go to a different church, you have to go to a different city, and
Yeah.
that wasn't as feasible. Nowadays, it's just so easy to just
right.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe there's different degrees too of, is somebody actually misleading people away from Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And that to me would be something that would be excommunicable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of.
Necessarily, they're causing division,
right.
but they're still Christians.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of the thing about Matthew 18 is it doesn't really, it doesn't give us a sense of which sins you do that with, which sins you don't do that with, and like it has a generalization. So I think it then becomes incumbent on every church leadership to go, okay, when do we exercise this Matthew 18? What are the things that we would do it for? And all the way through our situation, we just never felt that Matthew 18 was the right architecture for what we were dealing with. And so, we always found ourselves back into this Titus 3 of like, they're being divisive, but they, I do think they love Jesus and, this is crazy or whatever else. But we just never really ended up down the road that said we felt that excommunication was the right step in it. And therefore, because I think in part we're like, we want you to plug in someplace where hopefully you heal. And then from that, maybe you'll also realize like, oh, yeah, maybe we were a little off center, or maybe we got a little ugly there. Because that's my heart. My heart is, I'm not looking to be right. I want them to be at peace. And I certainly with any of us, I'd hope that we would come to an awareness, kind of that part where he talks about maybe God will grant them repentance, so to speak. Like they'll go like, oh yeah, we got so keyed up. We were so hurt by what Caesar's wife did to our daughter 2 or 3 years ago. And we just got spun up and overstated it. I hope that. I still hope it to this day. And if they can't get to that point, I just hope they get to a point where they're like not angry and bitter and feeling, violated in some way. Like I just hope for that. Yeah. Because I know what it's like to be in a bitter space. For me, I remember it was with my father. So, my father and I didn't talk for well over a decade. And, I'd call him Joel, with family, and it wasn't Dad. And at the core, I knew I was punishing him. That's what it was all about. I was bitter and I was punishing him. And that was a hard thing to have to confront myself on when I finally was like, and I think it was because I was doing the 10 Commandments or something like that. It was about honor your father and mother. And I remember I was like, I'm going to have to teach it that week. I'm like, I know this is me, and I would justify, well, by having distance, I can honor him better from a distance, kind of thing. But I'm not honoring him if I'm calling him Joel. I'm not honoring if I kind of snub him in my words. And so it was one of those like, yeah. And then the biggest step in that is, and this was probably a year ago, is when we finally started kind of reconnecting a little bit, and I just had to say, you know what? I need to ask for your forgiveness. I was bitter at you, and I was punishing you all these years. And he looked at me and he said, "Yep, you were." Okay. But it was true, regardless of whatever things he's done in life, I could have done that differently, but I wasn't. So, yeah. So it's all, you just want people, but then it was really liberating because I knew I was, wasn't healthy in my soul, wasn't a healthy soul because of it. So, yeah. So I did even text him yesterday and wished him happy birthday or Father's Day, but I haven't heard back from him. So apparently it's on him now. So any last things? Want to not go through this? What was that?
I think this new thing with the youth group is so exciting.
No, it's really...
Praying Moms has been praying for this youth group for a long time and for whatever God would have. And it seemed like it was really frustrating because there were not enough applicants that kind of fit the bill. And to me, this is like an answer that was bigger than we thought God would.
Yeah, no, I did not see this one coming.
Yeah.
And I mean,
the potential is so...
Yeah, it really, and I really do like this dude Austin. I really like him. Were you in the meeting last Tuesday by chance? So I was zooming into it.
He spoke at Baccalaureate.
Oh, he did. Oh, cool.
Sure that was him.
He might have. Yeah. That might be very much the case.
I was very impressed with him.
Yeah, he's a really solid dude. And it was funny. So I'm remote, and so I'm just watching it. And then Scott and I are texting back and forth the whole time while he's doing it. And at one point, he just says, "Hey, I want to see a show of hands. 1 being, this is the worst idea ever. This plan is nuts. And 10, it's the greatest thing ever made. Hold up your hands and give me a number." And as soon as he did that, I texted Scott. I'm like, "This dude's leading. He's leading this meeting now." That was the moment. He's leading. And because I always tell Scott, I'm like, anytime we were interviewing these guys, I'm like, if we put them in a room with our parents and leaders and kids, are they going to change the temperature of the room? Right? Are they going to be that person that you go like, that person, we're following that person right now? And everybody we were interviewing, I'm like, no, put that guy in the room. He's not going to raise the temperature of the room. Leadership will be like, Brett Downing will become the automatic leader in the room with these other guys because he's that guy already. And so, yeah, all of our candidates, I was just like, nah, man, that's not going to be the person. That's not it. And then when Austin was doing that, I'm like, there it is. That's it. And so I probably spent total 5-6 hours just more in like true dialogue with the guy. And every time I just like him more and more. So, yeah, I think it's going to be really, really great, really exciting. Curious to see how it all starts to come together. So, yeah. Well, rad, people. Anything else? You get 12 minutes. Look at that. Last time, it was like 45, 50 minutes. Banking time. So good, man. So good.
Modules, are there?
This was 14. 2 more.
All right.
2 more. Yeah. 16. And number 16 is just kind of a recap of kind of who we are as a church. So it's like an easy module. So, yeah. Look at y'all nearing completion, man.
Yeah.
Looky.
I'm going to be going the next one.
I'll let you, because I'm Matt the Benevolent. Oh, man, doubly sorry. Yeah, because I'm going to struggle with, like, envy.
I could, pull in and rub it in, maybe.
You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that.
Where
So,
in Scotland are you going?
yeah, that's what I was going to ask, too.